Hey everybody, Eric Grenier here with Philippe J. Fournier for this week's episode of The Numbers. It's January 30th. Philippe, I believe we must be halfway through the year, I think, at this stage. How are you holding up?
I'm surprised because I look at the numbers from my website and from my usual activity in January, and it's been the busiest January in a long time. And I'm holding up. It's going well. There's tons of polls, almost daily. And now with the Ontario election starting this week, we're going to get even more. So, very busy. How about you, Eric? How are you holding up?
I'm holding up okay. I know it's going to be a bit of a sprint for the next little while, which I'm looking forward to.
Yeah.
And then we'll relax for a little while after that, which will be fun. We'll have lots of tea leaves. No, they won't actually be tea leaves. There'll be actual results and these kinds of things that we can go over, and the fallout from all the elections that are going to be happening over the next little while. Okay, let's talk about the polls, the Liberal numbers in the polls. We're going to get, I already know what the comments will be in the YouTube video. The fact that we're even asking the question, are the Liberals on a comeback, will enrage very many people. And the fact that we will say that maybe they're not will also enrage a lot of people. So it's going to be lose-lose for us. But why don't you take us through some of the numbers that have come out over the last week?
Well, when the polls are strange and misunderstood, who are you going to call? The numbers. So, Eric, we have Nanos showing a tightening. We have Léger showing a tightening. We have Abacus showing a modest tightening. And obviously, we have now Ecos showing a statistical tie. So, obviously, they cannot all be correct at the same time. But I think we've said this before in the podcast, an electorate in flux, you're bound to have numbers that fluctuate a lot. So we have to deal with this. What is interesting is not necessarily the amplitude of the vector. The direction of the vector is there. The amplitude, I think many pollsters seem to disagree. But there is little doubt, however, that there has been some tightening. The addition by subtraction for the Liberals, removing Justin Trudeau, who was tremendously unpopular, seems to have helped the Liberals, and now I think many Canadians, are watching to see what will happen in the leadership race. So where do you want to start? Do you want to go into one specific set of numbers, or because the overview is still muddy, I think, right now. We're not sure if the subsamples agree. There seems to have the tightening seems to be happening at least in Ontario. Ontario is the largest regional subsample, and it looks like there's a modest tightening in Ontario, which would help the Liberals, right? Half the current Liberal caucus is in Ontario. But what are your first impressions when you look at the landscape right now?
I'm not sure if you probably don't remember this song from your childhood, but anybody who might have watched Sesame Street or anything like that when they were young, the one of these things is not like the other. One of these things just doesn't belong. So we got three polls, as you mentioned, the Nanos, Léger, and Abacus. Conservative support in those three polls is 42 to 43%. Pretty tightly.
Consensus.
Yeah. Liberal support is between 22 and 25%. Again, pretty tight, nothing unusual about that. The NDP is between 16 and 19%. And then there's the Ecos poll, the most recent one that came out, has the Conservatives at 36% when you round it off, 33% for the Liberals, and just 13% for the NDP. The NDP number being so much lower, probably contributing to the higher Liberal number. The Conservative number being very low is harder to parse out. And clearly, we've seen from Frank Graves on X, on social media, very responsive to some of the criticism. And we've even seen it in the poll that he put out, because he tested and kind of put out some numbers based on some of the things that he's getting some blowback on. One of them was the education weighting, because his poll tends to have a lot of university graduates, more than there should be, roughly twice as many based on what the population is. He applied an education weighting to his numbers in this one to show what the difference would be. Wasn't really a big difference.
No.
He also did a parallel online panel survey, more or less the same kind of numbers, although the NDP was quite a bit higher. So he's trying to show his work for sure. And, I don't doubt that those are the numbers that are coming out of the polling that he's doing. But it is still a big difference between the two. And it's not easily explained away. And I think that we have to say that, yes, the Liberals do seem to be coming up. Nanos has them up 4. Léger has them up 4. Abacus has them up 2.
Yeah.
The Conservatives probably have dropped. And Nanos has them down 3. Léger has them down 4. Abacus has them down 3.
Yep.
But we don't have enough proof of the kind of thing that ECOS is finding, that this is a single-digit race, that the Liberal support is roughly on par with where they were in the 2021 election. I just don't think we can say that. This is at the very high end of where things are for the Liberals.
Yeah. Well, very, very high. It's outside the
very,
brackets.
very high. It's outside of the margins of error. And at this stage, you can say the direction is in the same direction.
Yeah.
So the narrative is a little bit the same, I suppose, but the ECOS numbers would more or less produce another Liberal minority government. And it just doesn't feel like that's where we are.
Yeah. No, we are very careful here because, as I said in a pod last week, Eric, when we see a set of numbers that is different from the others, many people's reaction is to say that it's wrong from the get-go, right? And this is wrong. You shouldn't do that. You should be curious, and you should be doubtful. You should doubt. But that applies also to the person who is publishing the outlier data. You should doubt. It's okay to be sure of your work and to say, I'm honest and this is what I get. But if you look around and everybody else disagrees with you, at some point you have to turn the benefit of doubt on yourself. Listen, we do a weighted average, and for those who say ECOS is flooding the system, well, maybe, but that means that your model is wrong, because your model should weigh for pollsters just starting to publish. I mean, ECOS did not publish a lot in 2024. It looks like ECOS would have published more in January 25 than the whole of year 24. So you can weigh with that. You can be careful with the numbers. But let's say, okay, let's take a weighted average. Let's say the Liberals are back at around 25%. Leaderless Liberals, we should say. We will see what the effect of whoever leads the Liberals on March night. But let's say the Liberals are back at 25%. How should they feel about this? Should they feel relieved? Because they were staring at the abyss not so long ago, right? With Liberals in the teens in some polls, or at 20% according to Abacus. That was heading towards a third or fourth place finish in the seat count behind the Bloc Québécois. At 25%, Eric, I don't know what your numbers say, but suddenly the Liberals would at least have a normal defeat. Am I correct about this?
Yeah, they'd be able to at least win 60, 70, 80 seats, depending on how it breaks down. They're not anymore in danger of being overtaken by the NDP, because the NDP has lost, it seems, some steam over the last few weeks. I think that they were picking it up. One of the things that I think is starting to become pretty clear, and maybe the results of the election will show the opposite, but the NDP should have pulled the plug last fall.
Yeah. Well,
with Trudeau there, because when you look at how unpopular Trudeau was by the end of the year, it was accelerated by Freeland resigning, but the NDP was taking advantage of a little bit of it.
Yeah.
Finally taking advantage of a little bit of it. They were starting to get into the 20s, 20, 21 in some polls. We haven't seen that now for a little while. So if they had pulled the plug back in October, Trudeau's still the leader, I think you might have ended up with the NDP at least in second place in the vote. Just based on the Liberal vote. Yeah, based on Liberal voters needing to go somewhere else because they couldn't vote for Trudeau anymore. But now with Trudeau leaving, it's given a lot of permission for, I think, a lot of those voters. And I think it might be coming from both the Conservatives and the NDP those who are on the center part of the party that went over to the Conservatives, some of them might be coming back because Trudeau's gone, and some of them that were on the center left that went over to the NDP, some of them are coming back.
Yeah.
So I do believe that the Liberals have gained from Trudeau's resignation, and they're at that 25%, and maybe somewhere around there. But yeah, it makes me think that the NDP really blew their chance when they had it, and now they could end up in a lot of trouble, because now there's Léger has them at 16, and they have trouble even matching their polls, even their worst ones.
I don't think the NDP realizes how bad this is, even though the numbers have not moved that much. We have seen in provincial elections and by-elections, we have seen the Conservatives really, and I mean really, do well in most of rural areas. We have seen Nathan Cullen in northern BC losing a seat that he had won by more than 25 points in the election prior. You and I did the live stream for by-elections in Newfoundland, where it was a Liberal seat in rural area and the Conservatives won with big margins. And so there are NDP seats in rural areas in this country that are literally under siege from the Conservatives. And you would think the NDP could compensate those losses, those projected losses, by winning more in the downtown cores. But that only works if the Liberals are at 19 or 20. If the Liberals go back up to 25 or 26, and the NDP is stuck on neutral at 16 or 17%, they're not compensating those losses. And so suddenly the prospect of having the NDP battling with the official party status threshold of 12 seats is very real. They could get squeezed in this one. However, I will push back on one thing that you said. You said the NDP blew its chances in the fall. After the Jack meeting, I will tear up the CASA agreement. Well, I remember very well that the Bloc Québécois sided with Liberals to keep them in power for a little bit, because the Bloc Québécois said, we're not going to do it. We're not going to play the games of the Conservatives. We are doing our own thing. This chessboard has multiple variables, and suddenly, Eric, I mean, at some point we'll have to talk about this more. But the odds of this minority parliament going the distance all the way to October, I don't think it's the most likely scenario still, but I think the odds have increased a bit in the past 2 weeks because of these numbers.
Well, yeah, you said we'll have to talk about it at some point. We can talk about it right now.
Well, yes, that's true. Well, I figured with a new leader, it would be clearer. But yes, we can talk about it now too. Yeah.
No, but I mean, you can imagine that the NDP might decide that maybe they don't want to risk this. And again, I still come back to the same position. I don't know why you think things will be better in 6 months. But if you're the Liberals right now, do you want it to go to until October? If we start seeing more polls where the Liberals are pushing into the mid-20s, and
that's still a very bad loss.
It's still very bad, but it's you don't know if it's going to keep getting better. Maybe you still want to strike where the iron's hot, right? If you're Mark Carney, you're probably not going to be able to get into the House. So I don't know what that means for a few months of the House sitting and you're not there.
Yeah.
I think for him, you win. If he wins on March 9th, a little bit of a honeymoon, positive press for a little while, and you go to the polls a week later. It was mentioned on the RIT podcast. Dan Arnold made a very good point. Once the RIT drops, the spending limits start to kick in. There's no spending limits until that happens. So if you're the Conservative Party, you've got tons of money. Yeah. Why not spend it for 2-3 weeks just destroying Mark Carney in advertising? And then you can use the rest of your money during the campaign. Maybe you want to level the playing field. So I think that there's almost as much possibility, if not more, that we might not even get to March 24th. If I had to guess between a RIT drop in September versus between March 9th and 24th, I would choose between March 9th and 24th right now.
So the House doesn't come back. That's what you would say? Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. What does that do for our over-under, though? The election would be... The maximum length of an election is 50 days. Am I right about this? I think it's 7 weeks. So 7 weeks from mid-March.
Still looking at end of April, early May, first week of May.
Wow. Okay.
But I mean, we'll see what's going to happen with these numbers, right? Because if we do end up in early March and the Liberals are still at 21, 22, 23 in most polls, then maybe they do try to make a deal with the NDP. But the trend line is getting closer for the Liberals. It is some momentum. We'll see if they can carry it forward. And if they do, then maybe they don't want to risk putting it off, because the longer it could go both ways, right? Whoever becomes the prime minister, being in the job for longer might wear well on them, or it might just make them seem like the same crew making the same decisions, and so they need to get kicked out just as much as Justin Trudeau did. It's a gamble either way.
I think historically, summertime is good for incumbents, because we don't see them much. We've seen this several times. There's a lot of precedent of this, and as you know. But there's also a very recent precedent of the wheels completely falling off in the summer of 23 for the Liberals, right? So if the Liberals suddenly have better polling, they're in the 25, 26 point range, they could think that, we're going to have a summer of barbecues and of good press and of fighting Trump policies, the bullies out of the border. I could see them talking themselves into this, and I could see the NDP saying, you know what, we could be reduced to single-digit seats, so maybe we should wait it out. Maybe we should work together. But you are correct that if they start humming these numbers and they're high on them, and they're high on themselves, and they fall back, the scenario, I mean, it's a repeat of what we saw with Turner in 84, a repeat with what we saw from Kim Campbell in 93. We just did a special episode on 93 talking about this. Kim Campbell, after she won the PC leadership, shot up in the polls, began the campaign tied, and then the party was destroyed beyond repair after the election. So it's tough to go with precedents here, because it goes every which way, huh?
Yeah, it does, actually, because I was just thinking that Campbell waited a little while, because she won that leadership in June, so it was a bit later on than what's going to happen here. And then they went to the polls in October in 93. Turner took over the leadership and then went to the polls like a week later, he maybe 10 days, something like that, and that didn't work out well for him. So there are both scenarios there. But if you're the Conservatives right now, we were getting to the place where, especially after Freeland resigned and the first days after Trudeau resigned, 45, 46, 47%, right? They're now at the 42, 43 in most polls, which is where they were for most of last year.
That's right.
So it might be more of their natural place. But if you're the Conservatives, do you get worried at all? I still think that I'm sure that they are not believing the numbers from Frank Graves. The Conservatives, I think, would never do that anyway.
They're not alone.
Yeah, but the numbers that have them ahead by 15 to 20, I mean, that's what they were comfortable with before. So I would imagine that they are not panicking just yet. That they do know that they can kind of. They can count on at least a big chunk of their votes sticking around, not being bled to the Liberals.
About the Ontario numbers, the federal Ontario numbers, Léger in December, so after the Freeland resignation, it was 51 Conservatives, 21 Liberal, right? That's blowout. That's 100 seats, right? It's blue everywhere, basically. Now it's 47-27. So it went from a 30-point lead to a 20-point lead. You could say that, smaller sample, although usually it's around 400 cases. You could say that it could be a fluctuation, but everybody saw a tightening in Ontario. If the Liberals reach, 30% in Ontario, they had 39 in the last election. Let's say they go down around 28, 29, 30. They could still salvage 45 to 50 seats in the province. You add Montreal, you had a few keeps, holds in Atlantic Canada, maybe 2 in Winnipeg, a handful in Vancouver, although the BC numbers still don't look good. You're at around 70 seats. That means you cut your basically 75 seats. You cut your caucus in half. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's tremendous that this is considered good news for the Liberals. Let's be fair. I mean, we're only going to lose half of our MPs. Wow, we should go in an election early. That's for me, that's insane. But I get what you're saying because it's very possible that it could get worse. But you know very well, Eric, that politicians don't think like that. They go into the ring thinking we're the best, we're gonna fight it out, we're gonna last all 15 rounds or whatever. So this is gonna be a very interesting spring, and as you know, we're gonna get into this now. The Liberal leadership race, an outsider, self-proclaimed outsider, is looking
Christy
like
Freeland? Is this your?
That's right.
The
Yes,
Ottawa establishment. Did you not hear
absolutely.
that?
Finance minister, MP for 12 years. She's an outsider. But yeah, it looks like Mark Carney really has the edge right now. We're only at the end of January, but this is a short race, Eric. So what do you make of the numbers that we have seen on the leadership race so far?
We haven't gotten anything that's very specific to the leadership race, right? We haven't had a poll of Liberal members. We haven't seen fundraising data, anything like that. Though I did see that Mark Carney is spending six figures on Facebook, which suggests that he must have a lot of money to burn, right? Because you need to have $350,000 for the fee, and then he's also spending another $100K or so on Facebook ads. The numbers are pretty good for him. And, you know, when I mentioned going early in a campaign rather than waiting to go to the House, the Angus Reid Institute did a poll where they did hypothetical. You put in the leader names. And for Chrystia Freeland, they had it being a 20-point lead for the Conservatives, 24% for the Liberals, 44% for the Conservatives. And for Mark Carney, it was a 14-point lead, 29% for the Liberals, 43% for the Conservatives. Again, this does back up the idea that the Liberals have gotten a bump because people are probably already baking in the idea that it'll be either Carney or Freeland who wins. And Angus Reid Institute found that that does improve the Liberals to the mid to high 20s. And if you're Mark Carney, maybe you see that 29%, you see that Ecos poll that has you at 33%, or at least the Liberals, and you're thinking, you know, maybe, I don't know how he approaches data and polls and stuff like that, but maybe he's going to look at the better ones rather than the worse ones. But, you know, that is an important set of numbers for Liberals because they want to elect the candidate who is most likely to be reelected and win another government. And clearly we see that with the Leger poll. This was the number that was the most striking.
Oh, yeah.
Among Liberal voters, 57% now support Mark Carney, 17 Chrystia Freeland.
17. That's a 40-point lead.
Before Christmas, supporters. What was it? It was like...
It was very close.
He would get like 14 and she would get like in the 20s.
Yeah.
Like he's just exploded. Like that's incredible that he's gone that fast.
Yeah. And it was a reasonable sample. I think it was 336 cases. I think that's it. Yeah. Yes, it is. And so among Liberal supporters, now we know that members or sympathizers, as they're called, are not the same as supporters, but this is still a 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 ratio in favor of Mr. Carney. So I think from this data, we have no other choice than to say that he's the favorite right now. I mean, those who said we already knew that, well, that was from your vibes, man, because we didn't have numbers. These numbers basically say that's the case. I just want to pause here for a second, Eric, to talk about this Angus Reid poll. So we didn't see a generic ballot from the Angus Reid Institute on this poll. But as you said, Ms. Freeland was at 24% and Mr. Carney at 29%. Do you remember the last Angus Reid poll with voting intentions?
Yes, they were at 16%.
The Liberals were at 16%. So that was in late December during the holidays, so which is rare, admittedly. Just before the Trudeau resignation. The previous Angus Reid Institute poll was 45 Conservative, 21 NDP, and 16 Liberals. So, you know, those numbers indicate that even the runner-up potentially to the race would really bump the Liberals to the mid-20s. And, you know, I'm looking forward to see their next poll, to see where the water level is at, because that's a big bump. But again, addition by subtraction. You remove Trudeau from the equation, many voters are willing, at least, to come back to the Liberals.
The Abacus poll, they put out one as well on the Liberal leadership, does back up the notion that Carney would boost the Liberals more than Freeland would, because among the general public, 33% of Canadians said they had a positive view of Mark Carney, 20% had a negative. So he's plus 13. Like, that's pretty good among the public, right? Because there's not a lot of leaders right now that are above water. Pierre Poilievre, in a good poll, is up by a couple points. And then the next poll, he's down by a couple points. Chrystia Freeland, though, 29% positive, 30 negative. Pretty good for a Liberal when you consider how bad Justin Trudeau's numbers were. But it does seem like, Canadians don't like her as much, or that she's carrying some of the weight and baggage from the Trudeau years. Among Liberal voters, 64% positive for Mark Carney, 5% negative. So they like him a lot. Freeland still did pretty well, 54% positive, 10% negative. So, they're both well-liked among Liberals, Carney a bit more, and among the public at large, Carney is liked, his net numbers are better than Chrystia Freeland. So again, if you're a Liberal, registered Liberal, trying to figure out who's got the best shot at beating Pierre Poilievre, these numbers would point you towards Mark Carney. Yeah.
And ultimately, you would think that the sympathizers that are not committed to a candidate, that's what they would look at, right? You look for a winner. And also, I mean, the ballot butt question for the next election has changed tremendously. We think, right? We don't know what it will be yet, but it points to Canada-U.S. relations. I think carbon tax is dead, right?
They both say they're going to get rid of it, so.
And it's supposed to increase on April 1st, I think. So I bet that probably you live in Ontario, Eric. You probably received not too long ago your carbon rebate. Probably that was the last one. Or maybe you'll have one last one after it's canceled.
Doug Ford's going to keep me whole. Don't worry.
Well, we'll see about that. But if it is U.S.-Canada relations, the ballot box question, Léger had numbers on this, which I think is so timely. So among the potential leaders for the Liberal Party of Canada, who do you believe is best suited to manage the relationship with the Trump administration? Among all voters, 35% Mark Carney, 18% Chrystia Freeland, even though she's the one who negotiated, mostly successfully, the latest CUSMA, the new NAFTA, right? And among liberal supporters, it's 55-25 in favor of Mr. Carney. So advantage across the board. We'll see if he blows this, because right now it looks like the race is his to lose, and he has a month to go. So we'll see. We know that a campaign, especially a quick one, can turn on a dime if you do a mistake. So we'll follow that throughout.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing when there's some debates or something, because you haven't seen much of Carney. Yeah. And it's easy to win when you're coasting, but how is that going to go when you're actually put on the spot? Because, he's going to have to debate all those other Liberal leadership contestants, and then he's going to have to debate Pierre Poilievre and Jagmeet Singh and Yves-François Blanchet, and how's that going to go? Yeah. We'd like to get some indication of it, because I don't think his first big primetime moment should be 2 weeks out from Election Day. We got Ontario now officially. I think we called it. I think we were the ones who broke it last week, right?
Absolutely, we did.
Yeah. Our sources were very good. Our web searches. So Ontario going to the polls on February 27th. So this is a relatively short campaign, 28 days in Ontario.
Yeah, that's so short.
And hey, we got the same kind of polling controversy. Yeah. BS, maybe. Let's call it that. I'm so tired of this kind of stuff.
I wasn't going to say it. But,
anyway.
So what do we make of this? Okay, so we had polls from Léger. I think that was last week. We mentioned it last week. Abacus data and Nick Kouvalis of Campaign Research, who he doesn't hide it. He's the PC pollster. They all three have the Doug Ford PCs at around 45, 46, 47% across the province, which, when was the last time a party had that much in an election? The high 40s, you would have to go back to the 80s, right? I don't think Mike Harris had that high. McGuinty didn't have
McGuinty
that
must have
high.
won. He must have won pretty big in 2003.
I'm going to look this up while you speak. But the thing is, it feels like this could be a blowout. But then you have the IVRs and the text to online. Main Street has you updated this?
Yeah, they just put this out today. They
Okay.
updated their dashboard.
The
their
poll
public-facing
that
dashboard.
the poll they had published publicly was 36 PC and 30, I think, Liberals. Now I
29, I
see
think.
38.5. Okay, so this is
29
still
for the Liberals. Yeah.
yeah, this is still a PC victory, but it would be a tamed victory. It would be an 80, 75 seats and not 100, not a blowout victory for the PCs. Eric, where are you at the starting line of this Ontario election?
You mentioned the polls that have the PCs way ahead. There's also an innovative research group which put them at 51. So there's all of these polls that we've seen for a long time, pollsters that we know well, showing the PCs with more support than they had in the last election, the Liberals with less support, the NDP with less support, and we have Doug Ford, who is confidently going to the polls. So he clearly believes, and his numbers, as we know from Nick Kuvalis, show the PCs ahead by 25 points or so. You have these other polls that have it a closer race, single digit to 10 points. And maybe that's the case. We have seen, as you mentioned, that the Liberals have got a bump federally in Ontario, so maybe there's some bleeding over. Who knows which is the one contributing to the other. But again, the bulk of the polls, and the polls that we know have good track records in Ontario, are showing this big lead.
Yeah.
And we know that the Ford PCs, who have lots of money to spend on polling, think that that is probably the situation, right? I don't think they'd be going to the polls if they were up by 6 points. I think that they would pump the brakes a little bit. So we'll see. It's interesting that the Main Street poll is showing a widening of the gap since they last polled. So I think they're going to do a daily thing, their dashboard.
They are.
The public-facing one, which they show where their top lines are. And we'll see what's going to happen with it, if it's going to converge towards those other ones, or we're still going to have this disagreement. And it'll get cleared up eventually. It won't be the first time. You weren't following polls at the time, but in 2014, we were getting this kind of stuff in Ontario.
Oh, yeah?
It was really confusing election, with some polls having the Liberals ahead by 10, others had a tie. Some pollsters were putting likely voter models, others weren't. It was an absolute mess. And I just hope we don't end up like that in this campaign. I'd like some clarity, because the polls are supposed to give us some indication of what's going on in a campaign. It's supposed to inform us, inform voters as well. And this is just confusing, and it's not helpful, I don't think, for anybody.
I will say this, though. I mean, in 2018 in Ontario and in 2022, the polls were really good, right?
Mm-hmm.
They were really good. In 2022 especially, I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I had 10 pollsters with an A or A plus rating, including Main Street Research.
Yeah.
So the polls were really good. The fact that they diverge right now, I guess it's more difficult to poll low turnout, expected to be a low turnout election, low interest election, when you project a blowout. And also, let's not forget, it's a very simple fact, but it's winter. We rarely have elections in winter, and perhaps it's going to have an effect. I also saw Elections Ontario saying they will only have 3 days of advance voting, whereas usually it's closer to 8, 9, or 10. So I guess this is going to hurt turnout, and it makes the job of pollsters even more difficult in this situation. But let's remind that the polls diverging at the early in the campaign is not that bad. It's if they diverge on February 25th, that will be pretty bad. But we'll see. In 2022, they were excellent. So.
Yeah, and Ontarians are being bombarded with news from the United States, with the Liberal leadership race federally, with the fact that there could be a federal campaign very soon, and also Doug Ford calls an election. So I'm not surprised that at the beginning of the campaign, as you mentioned, you could have this divergence, because Ontarians are probably just starting to clue in. Though I did see my first signs today. I saw my first Ontario signs, I saw a couple green signs and one NDP sign in Ottawa Centre.
I see.
So I guess it's between those two parties. I guess that's how it works.
Hey, by the way, for the record, I just looked this up. My mind must have forgotten this. You are correct. In 2003, Mr. McGuinty of the OLP had 46% of the vote. And the election prior, Mike Harris had 45%. So I guess the mid-40s is not that unusual, although it's still 2003. It's been more than 20 years. Suddenly, it feels like it's not that far away, but it is. It really is. My students who are adults, who will vote this year, were not born in that year. Yeah. Funny how time goes forward only.
Yeah,
right?
we're getting old. Okay, we will finish off with this one last poll out of Quebec.
Yeah.
Because we haven't gotten a provincial poll out of Quebec since, I think, early December.
That's right.
And this one comes, oddly enough, from the Bloc.
Yeah.
Which commissioned a poll from Léger. And it included provincial numbers. Helpfully for their little buddies, I guess, the PQ.
Provincial numbers, federal numbers, and sovereignty numbers from Léger. Yes, it is a leaked poll by a party, so we always have to be careful, selection bias and all that thing. But it was leaked to the Canadian press, and then I got a hold of the report. Well, a partial report, right? We saw
It's got,
Eric,
30, 40 pages missing from it?
Eric noticed in the report the pagination, the numbers. It looks like many pages are missing, so there's something that we didn't see. But we did see provincial numbers. Parti Québécois, 34%, regression to the mean. This is where they've been, give or take a point, for the past year and a half. Coalition Avenir Québec, François Legault, 25%. And then 15 Liberal, 12 QS, 11 Conservative. This is maybe a bit low for all three parties, but maybe a bit low by a point or two. So it's not nothing too curious. And at the federal level, the Bloc Québécois, 37% in Quebec, 26% Conservative, and 21 Liberals. And when I got this report last weekend, I remember looking, it's like, oh, this is familiar. And I went on my website, 338canada.com, and they were right on the average. 37, 36 for the Bloc Québécois, 26 for the Conservatives, 21 for the Liberals in Quebec. So that led me to believe, like, why was this leaked? Because it's interesting. I'm very happy to have seen it. We hadn't seen voting intentions in Quebec, as you said, for almost 2 months. But we don't learn anything much in this poll. It's a status quo poll. Eric, before I want to say a word about the sovereignty numbers, but did you have any impressions, anything that struck out from you? That stuck out for you?
Well, why would the Bloc decide to put this out? Well, 37 is a good number for them.
Yep.
So maybe they wanted to have that out there. And they were leading by quite a bit among Francophones, which is usually the number that the Bloc pays attention to. Just, do you have them in front of you?
I can pull it up very quick. Yeah.
I'm just curious what the Anglophone numbers are in Quebec, because obviously there's discussion of whether the Conservatives would have a chance to win any of the seats on the West Island in Montreal.
You know what? I do remember this, and they were... Hang on, I have it here. Yes,
Okay.
it was close. So, Bloc Québécois... Okay, federally. So, langue maternelle. Non-Francophones, careful, of course. Small sample. It's 136 cases. So, what's that? Plus or minus 8. 35% Liberal, 31 Conservative.
Okay. Yeah, well, if enough of that is in Mount Royal or Pierrefonds, Dollard, or Lac Saint-Louis, who knows? You could have a Conservative MP on the West Island. But for the provincial numbers, my only comments are pretty simple. PQ seems to have hit its ceiling. It's at a cruising altitude, but it doesn't seem to be able to go much higher than this, which I find is interesting because in the days of Jacques Parizeau when they won, or René Lévesque, obviously, they could get into the mid-40s, the high 40s even.
Yeah.
But they're still very far from that. But because everything else is so divided between the other parties, it's good enough, right? They can win a big majority government. It's actually kind of weird you can win a big majority government with 34% of the vote.
Don't get our members started on electoral reform. Don't.
And the CEQ, like, they are just in the worst possible kind of position they can be. Obviously, things could get worse, but it must be very frustrating for them to be at 25% and set to be wiped out aside from a few holdouts, just because that their support is too uniform across the province, so they're just not high enough to actually win a lot of seats, even if they finish second by 10 points over the Liberals in third. So we'll see what's going to happen, but status quo in Quebec, which means that issue of a impending PQ government is going to be something that the federal party is going to have to talk about.
Of course.
But sovereignty, maybe the man in the White House has shifted some thoughts there.
So that's interesting because I've had some pushback in my analysis of the sovereignty numbers, but what we have to state is that really the sovereignty numbers have been incredibly stable. If we look at léger polling only, so that's léger since the last election, from February 23 all the way to January 25. Here's the support for sovereignty. 38, 37, 36, 35, 35, 36, 36, 35, 35, 35, 37, 31. So this
goes back to my song. One of these things is not like the other.
Well, there you go. Absolutely. However, the support, against sovereignty has not gone up. It seems that this chunk of voters that, pressed yes on sovereignty question, they went to the I don't knows, the uncertain category. The uncertain fraction went from 8 to 16% in léger polling only. So the same methodology. Wow. That's huge. So what you could say about this is basically those who are les souverainistes mous, we call them, like soft sovereigntists, that could go either way. They're inclined towards sovereignty, but they're not like completely sold on it. And now we have this economic uncertainty. We have this bullying from the president of the United States. We have threats of tariffs. Aluminum is a big industry in Quebec, right? Yep. And so those tariffs did hurt in 2018. They lasted, I think, a year and a half. And they would hurt again. So suddenly, those who are 100% sold on sovereignty will say there's never been a better time for sovereignty. But those in the middle, those who hesitate, those who are les souverainistes mous, maybe say, you know what, we should wait a bit. And so what I think I'm going to follow here this year, if we see in subsequent polling, because we should have Quebec polls every month or every 2 months this year, if the sovereignty numbers still trail by 20, right now it's 22 points. For Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon, will he hold his horses? Will he just slow down on this? Because he's been all in. Last year, just in April of last year, said we will have a referendum early in the mandate. We're gonna be independent before the end of the decade. Well, we're in 2025. We're getting closer here. And this uncertainty, you could build an argument for sovereignty because of the uncertainty, but it doesn't seem like Quebecers are buying it right now.
And generally in the past, the
true.
uncertainty about it, the risk about it has been the trump card for the Federalist side, right? We saw this in Scotland, when it's easier to make the argument that you don't know what's going to happen, so it could be worse. And I think when you have Donald Trump and the United States being so unpredictable, that argument becomes a lot stronger. I can almost imagine on the debate stage in the federal campaign, which is going to happen this year. Next year, who knows what's going to happen by the end of next year.
Yeah.
But you can imagine that in the French language debate, there will be a question probably about Quebec sovereignty. And I can almost imagine word for word Pierre Poilievre saying how, this is not the time when we're facing stuff from the United States to talk about this, So it'll be interesting to see if it's going to have an impact. But the fact that it is the undecided rather than the no side that is increased, I think is very revealing and very interesting, something to follow for the next few months.
And if François Blanchet knows this, I would be very surprised if François Blanchet is going to focus the interest of Quebec in the Federation. Yes, we're sovereigntists, but I don't think he's going to make the same mistake as Gilles Duceppe did a few times when in a federal campaign you start talking about sovereignty. Voters are not there right now. At least the voters that you're trying to reach. The voters you have, they're there. But you need a little more, right? Let's recall that the Bloc Québécois has not won the most seats and the most votes in Quebec since 2008. Yeah. My students were toddlers. So, Anyway, so that's it for Quebec.
Yeah. Well, it won't be it for Quebec. I'm sure it'll be a big topic of conversation over the next few months in the election campaign. All right, let's move to the number of the week. That'll be it for our looking at the polls. I'm just going to go mine first because mine's pretty simple.
Okay.
I've done it before. It's a ratio, 2-1. This is the endorsement advantage for Mark Carney over Chrystia Freeland. He has somewhere around 56, 57. Some of the counts are a bit different. Endorsements from MPs within caucus. Chrystia Freeland has 26 or 27. 2-1 for the person who's not in caucus against the person who is. That's right. And I just think that speaks kind of volumes. I think that had this race taken place, let's say in November, not sure if the numbers would be the same, but I think that a lot of caucus members were the ones who supported Trudeau certainly wouldn't have liked that Chrystia Freeland did what she did at the end of December. But even the ones who were not happy with this, but hang together as a team, I think that might have loosened their support for her. So anyway, 2-1 endorsement advantage for Mark Carney over Chrystia Freeland. Not going to decide the campaign. It's not a delegated race.
That's right.
All MPs are not created equal in terms of how useful they are for a leadership candidate, but it does kind of give us an idea of that internal dynamic within the party, which I think is very fascinating.
Yeah, that's interesting. My number of the week, 39. In the Abacus poll, if you break down federal vote intention by education or scolarité, as we say in French, among university graduates, 39 for the Conservatives and 28 for the Liberals. This is a big contrast to what Ecos has found. He found the Liberals leading among university graduates, and there were questions you mentioned earlier in the pod of how it was weighted, right? But what mattered more to me was that Mr. Graves saw university graduates more to the Liberal side, and we haven't seen that in a while. I looked up other polling because not all firms break down by education, but when we do have those numbers, in the past year, the Conservatives have been leading, although not by the big margins that we see among high school graduates, but still the Conservatives have been leading. So let's keep an eye on this in future polls to see if it changes, because we could be in flux right now. We can be in transition towards a new plateau that we haven't reached yet. So
yeah, really interesting time to be following the numbers, and also a bit confusing. So hopefully we can provide a little bit of clarity even as we try to grapple with it. And
I ain't afraid to know polls. You get that reference, my friend.
Yeah, you're talking about how old we are. That's how old that movie is now? It's like 40 years old.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, oh God.
I saw Ghostbusters 2 in a drive-through.
You did, huh?
Yeah,
wow.
It scared the hell out of me.
Wow.
Okay, that'll be it for this week's episode. We're going to do our mailbag episode. Yeah. We got some federal questions. We got some Ontario election questions. We got some travel-related questions. We got some interesting stuff. Excellent. So if you want to listen to the mailbag, go to thenumberspod.ca. There's links in the show notes and in the description for the video. And we get your support on our Patreon, which we really appreciate, and it's going to be a busy year, so hope that you will join us. So Philippe, we'll chat again in a week.
Merci beaucoup, everybody. Merci beaucoup, Eric. Hail to the mailbag.